Hello and welcome back to Chapter 9, Part B. Here we are going to talk about vocatives, interjections, and absolute phrases, additional kinds of sentence modifiers. Pretty exciting. So let's get started with vocatives. Vocatives are nouns or noun phrase of direct address. So if you're specifically addressing certain people or groups, you are using vocatives. If I said, Your Honor, I submit this gun into evidence. Your Honor is the vocative. Pleased to meet you, sire. Sire is the vocative. Tell me, General, where will the troops be deployed? Perhaps the most famous vocative in English literature. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Jasmine, you do deserve a good tiger like Raja. Vocatives are going to go on a line above the diagram, unconnected to anything else. So here's one example. Your Honor, I submit this gun into evidence. If we decide that your is the determiner for honor, which I think it is, then it goes underneath honor just like any other determiner. If we decided that it were all part of the title, Your Honor, then it would all go on that one line. But regardless, it's floating in the air above the main clause of the sentence. It is floating around in the sky, untethered. Let's look at friends, Roman, countrymen, lend me your ears. A couple of different ways we might diagram this one also. If we decide that friends, Romans, and countrymen are all separate vocatives, which is to say three separate nouns of direct address, three separate groups being addressed, we would diagram it like this. Friends on top, then Romans, then countrymen. And then the implied subject of this imperative sentence is you, right? You, lend me your ears, pattern 8. But if you think, as I do, that these are actually one vocative and two appositives, vocatives, which is to say that the friends and the Romans and the countrymen are all the same, then we would diagram it like this. One line, friends, and then renamed as an appositive, Romans, renamed as an appositive, countrymen. Now we are cooking with gas. So that's how we diagram vocatives. Let's talk a little bit about interjections now. Interjections are one of the 8 parts of speech. They are just these expressions that you sort of insert into the conversation. They don't really mean anything. You're just interjecting them. They do mean something. They have individual meaning, right? But they're not crucial to the meaning of the sentence in any way. Goodness gracious, I think I left the oven on. Good grief. Lucy moved the football again. Heavens to Betsy, we'd better hurry up. Heavens to Betsy, right? It's just an idiom. It's just an expression. We are just interjecting it to add a little flavor to our sentence. We bid our British friends farewell, cheerio. These are going to be diagrammed on a separate line also. Like so, we bid our British friends farewell, cheerio. I find that the dictionary is really helpful if you are wondering whether or not something is an interjection. Just look it up. Cheerio. It is, in fact, an interjection. It's chiefly British, it will say, in your dictionary, if your dictionary is anything like mine. So that's how we diagram the interjection. You'll notice I left the punctuation out. We do not include punctuation marks in our sentence diagrams unless they are apostrophes up in the predicating verb. What about good grief? Lucy moved the football again. Here, I'm pretty convinced that good is part of the interjection. I don't think it's modifying grief. Yeah, like, oh, what kind of grief? Oh, the good kind. I don't think that's what it's doing. I think it's all part of the interjection. So I diagrammed it all on one line. You'll notice how much of this, though, is stylistic interpretation on my part, right? Deciding that good is part of the interjection, but that your is the determiner for honor, or that Romans and countrymen are appositives for friends. We're getting to the point in our class where you're going to have to make some judgment calls. Speaking of which, let's talk about dependent clauses and broad reference clauses. Okay, so some dependent clauses might be said to modify the entire sentence rather than being dependent on one particular part of an independent clause. And your book is really pretty vague about this, which dependent clauses these are. In fact, it at one point suggests that most, if not all, dependent clauses might be thought of as whole sentence modifiers, depending on the context. Yikes is what I say to that. Yikes. So I've been living in this world this whole time where all dependent clauses are whole sentence modifiers? Now you tell me. So since we don't have much more information on this, I think we should just continue to diagram dependent clauses the way we always have, with a subordinator on a dotted line connecting the two verbs. Piece of cake, nothing to worry about, remain calm. Also, there are some relative clauses, specifically those introduced by the relative pronoun which, that are modifying the whole sentence rather than a single noun. And again, I say yikes to this. They are set off by commas, one helpful way to distinguish them. But we, again, don't have any info on how to diagram them. So I'm going to say let's not worry about it. Let's just not worry about it. Let's just diagram them the way we always have diagrammed our relative clauses previously. And let's move on to something we do know a little bit more about, absolute phrases. Absolute phrases are independent from the main sentence, even though they are connected to it by a comma. Okay, so they're not connected to the main sentence, grammatically speaking. They have a very specific form. Okay, absolute phrases are going to be a noun phrase followed by some kind of post-noun modifier. Okay, it could be a participle or participial phrase, it could be a prepositional phrase, it could be an adjectival noun phrase, whatever. But it is a noun phrase followed by a post-noun modifier. That's how you're going to be able to identify them. That's how they look. There are two kinds of absolute phrases. We'll diagram them the same way, but you should know what they are. The first is a kind that explains a cause or condition, and the second is the kind that's going to add detail to an idea from the main clause. First, let's talk about the first kind, explaining a cause or condition. Here's the example I came up with. Our bus being out of gas, we pulled over to the side of the road. You'll notice the noun phrase is our bus, and the post-noun modifier being out of gas, the participial phrase. Okay, so it's an absolute phrase in its form. This example gives us sort of a general sense of what happened, right? That the bus is out of gas, right? But it's not a particularly strong causal relationship the way we might find in some other dependent clauses. When our bus ran out of gas, since our car ran out of gas, because our car ran out of gas, whatever vehicle we happen to be talking about, there's not that strong causal relationship that we would see. And so what's happened is our absolute phrase is not as prescriptive, right? More possibilities are open because of the absolute phrase. You could also use an absolute phrase as a focal point in a sentence to focus attention on one particular detail. So we're adding additional focus. Hands above his head, the suspect advanced cautiously toward the uniformed officers. Okay, so first let's identify it as an absolute phrase. Well, we have our noun phrase, hands, and we have our post-noun modifier above his head, prepositional phrase. You'll notice we are focusing on a specific detail, right? How he advanced, right? With his hands above his head. But it's not grammatically connected to the main clause. So no matter which absolute phrase option we're talking about, cause or condition or adding more detail, we're going to diagram them off to the left side by themselves. So it's going to look something like this. The day being sunny, we had a picnic. Ooh, it's not above the main clause, it's parallel to the main clause. The day being sunny, and you'll notice that we have a present participle, right? We have a participial phrase, an adjectival one, and so it has a pattern 2. So not above the main clause, parallel to it. How about this example? Tears in their eyes, the couple spoke their vows. Tears in their eyes. Okay. So again, we have the noun phrase tears. We have a post-noun modifier in the prepositional phrase in their eyes. And you'll notice that there's not a verb in sight, right? Since we have a prepositional phrase here doing the modifying, we don't have any verbs. That means we don't have any patterns. So no patterns to be included in this case. Let's move on to discussing sentence appositives. So sentence appositives are more fancy than regular old appositives. Regular old appositives rename the subject, but sentence appositives rename or restate the entire main idea of the sentence. I had some trouble coming up with these on my own, so I just stole the examples from page 203 in your book. He waved his pink right hand in circles. His favorite gesture. Oh man. So, his favorite gesture is in apposition to the waving of the pink right hand. Yeah? How about this one? The musical opened to rave reviews and standing room only crowds. A smashing success. What's a smashing success? The whole thing, right? The musical opening to rave reviews and standing room only crowds. The whole thing. The whole idea is being renamed. A pair of cardinals has set up housekeeping in our pine tree. An unexpected but welcome event. You'll notice that these last two in particular are not doing that thing that absolute phrases do, right? They're not giving us noun, phrase, post-noun modifier. Okay? That's one good way that we can potentially distinguish them, right? They don't have to follow that pattern, although of course they can. And here are a couple of tips I have for you on distinguishing sentence appositives from regular appositives or from other structures. They frequently follow dashes, right, as in the second two examples above. And you'll notice that they're not introducing a new or subordinate idea the way that absolute phrases do, okay? And they don't have that same structure necessarily. So I don't really know, to tell you the truth, how we diagram these because our book is pretty silent on this point. So I'm going to assume that we diagram sentence appositives in parentheses, like regular appositives, and off to the side, like absolute phrases. Sounds pretty good to me. He waved his pink right hand in circles. His favorite gesture. You'll notice that gesture is in parentheses to designate the appositive status. His and favorite are modifying gesture below it the way we would do with a regular appositive, but it is off to the left and parallel with the main clause the way that an absolute phrase would be. Which says you have learned a lot about whole sentence modifiers and now you are in the driver's seat. Put in that practice and you will have success. Talk to you soon.